Jared Isaacman's Senate confirmation hearing gets tough.
Was Elon Musk in the meeting?
I was being interviewed by the President of the United States.
The U.S. Space Force hands big money to big companies, and a new Soyuz crew has arrived at the International Space Station. As always, we'll have all that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. This week, the U.S. Space Force awarded a big contract to 3 different launch companies: SpaceX, United Launch Alliance, and Blue Origin. The 3 companies have been awarded a National Space Security Launch Phase 3 Lane 2 contract with a total value of nearly $13.7 billion. This contract represents a block buy of missions from all 3 companies as part of Space Force's continued acquisition of space missions from commercial contractors that goes back to the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program from the 1990s. That first phase, set up by the Air Force at the time, originally consisted of Boeing and Lockheed Martin rockets with the Atlas and Delta families. Later, when SpaceX and Falcon 9 came along, the company had to fight hard to make a presence within this competition and was initially awarded some of these Phase 1 contracts as well. In later years, the Air Force changed the program's name to National Security Space Launch to reflect the fact that expendable launch vehicles were no longer the norm. SpaceX and ULA secured a spot on Phase 2 of this contract with over 40 missions split between both providers in a 60-40 arrangement. 60% of missions for ULA and 40% going to SpaceX. For Phase 3, already under Space Force at the time, the military decided to spread out the money. They split it into 2 lanes, Lane 1 and Lane 2. Lane 1 would feature all the more experimental missions flown by newer rockets with less heritage, and if they were to fail, the Space Force would still be okay. Lane 2 would feature the traditionally expensive, highly complex, and highly expensive payloads that only experienced and more capable rockets would be able to carry out. Now, we covered Lane 1 contracts recently when companies like Stoke and Rocket Lab were added to the list of contractors eligible for those types of missions. For Lane 2, the Space Force expected nearly 60 missions to be carried out in a 5-year period, but this time it would split these between 3 providers instead of 2. A small batch of these missions would be given to a third provider, and the remainder would be split in a 60-40 fashion between the other 2 providers. In this week's announcement, the U.S. Space Force awarded 28 missions to SpaceX for about $5.9 billion, 19 missions to ULA for about $5.4 billion, and Blue Origin was given the third provider position with 7 missions for $2.4 billion. Now, if you pause to do the math, well, that's a lot of money given the number of missions awarded. Even in the case of SpaceX, which has the smallest average price per mission of $210 million, that's definitely more pricey than what we saw in the previous round of military contracts like Phase 2. Now, one reason this might be the case is that in their bids, the providers also included extra money for facilities and to develop new procedures for their new rockets, especially with Vulcan and New Glenn only starting to launch now, unlike SpaceX's Falcon family. Just a few days after the awarding of this contract, the U.S. Space Force assigned the first batch of missions under it to ULA and SpaceX. In the case of SpaceX, the company was assigned 7 missions, 3 on Falcon 9 and 4 on Falcon Heavy, for a price of $845.8 million, and ULA was assigned 2 missions for $427.6 million. The per-mission prices in this first batch of assignments are substantially lower than the one for the overall contract, so there may be some truth to the idea that the overall contract includes extra money for other purposes. It's also worth pointing out that the per-mission prices are also a lot more expensive for ULA than SpaceX, despite SpaceX having 4 Falcon Heavy rockets in that list. The Space Force plans to continue assigning more missions every year for the next 5 fiscal years, so we'll have to keep an eye on how much more expensive, or cheaper, these missions are in later rounds. This week, we learned that Firefly's first Blue Ghost mission is now truly, officially over. We followed this mission closely in previous episodes, but here's a short summary in case you need a refresher. Just over a month ago, on March 2nd, Blue Ghost became the first U.S. lander to successfully touch down on the lunar surface since the 1970s. It was a complete success, as it didn't fall over. A very impressive achievement, especially considering this was Firefly's very first attempt at landing on the moon. The mission continued that success over the following 2 weeks, operating its 10 payloads and surviving the heat of the lunar noon. It even witnessed a lunar eclipse while there. The lander sent back nearly 120 gigabytes of data, which NASA and Firefly are still processing and analyzing. However, as night fell on March 16th, Blue Ghost's end was near. It was never designed to survive the harsh conditions of lunar night, so 5 hours after sunset, Blue Ghost sent its farewell and shut down. Firefly's Kevin Schultz explained it in an interview with NSF before Blue Ghost's launch in January.
So the expectation right now is that the technology that we have on board will not survive the freezing cold. It's a cryogenic abyssal dark, and it will tend to kill most things that have fine structures like batteries and microprocessors.
But there was always the chance that the lander might wake up as soon as the solar panels caught sunlight again. After all, that's exactly what happened last year with Japan's SLIM mission, which survived multiple nights on the lunar surface. So Firefly tried to contact Blue Ghost on the next lunar day, but unfortunately, there was no response, meaning Blue Ghost's mission is now officially over. But what a successful mission it was! Now, even though the first Blue Ghost didn't make it through the night, there's a chance that Firefly might try to conquer the night on a future mission.
The ability to survive the night is something we're absolutely capable of. So as soon as NASA says that they're ready for us to take on that challenge for a future mission, we'll be ready to go.
Another important event that happened this week was Jared Isaacman's confirmation hearing in the U.S. Senate to become NASA's 15th administrator. The first step after being officially nominated by the president is to go through these hearings at their respective committee in the Senate. In this case, it was the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, chaired by Senator Ted Cruz, with Senator Maria Cantwell as ranking member. Jared wasn't alone in the confirmation hearing, as it was also shared with Olivia Trusty, nominee to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission. The committee has 28 members, but not all of them were present at the hearing. Most of those who were, though, asked tough questions on pressing matters pertaining to NASA's programs and the agency's future. Now, clearly, going into detail on this hearing would probably take about as long as it actually was, about 2.5 hours. But to summarize, most of the pressing questions from the committee members were along a few key topics. In Jared's prepared remarks before the hearing, he made a comment that NASA should focus on Mars, so of course, there were questions about what that would mean for the Artemis program. Jared insisted during the hearing that Artemis would still follow through by sending Artemis 2 around the moon and Artemis 3 to the lunar surface. Senator Ted Cruz pointed out the geopolitical importance for NASA to return to the moon before China does, showing an AI-generated poster depicting a scenario where either the US or China is on the moon by 2030.
I am hard-pressed to think of a more catastrophic mistake we could make in space than saying to communist China, the moon is yours, America will not lead.
If we do not lead the way and we're following, we may be following forever, and the consequence of which could be extraordinary. I don't think we can afford to find that out the hard way. As you said, sir, and I've agreed for a very long time, space is the ultimate high ground. We cannot afford to cede that ground.
During the hearing, Jared insisted that pursuing a human mission to Mars can be done while NASA also puts astronauts on the lunar surface.
Senator, I think if we can concentrate our resources at the world's greatest space agency, we don't have to make a binary decision of moon versus Mars, or moon has to come first versus Mars. I think we could be paralleling these efforts and doing the near impossible, which is exactly why the American taxpayers funded NASA in the first place.
So do we have your commitment that you will not allow the scenario on the right on this poster to happen, that China will not beat us to the moon, that one of these heroes sitting in this room will set his or her, and as a father of 2 daughters, I'm particularly excited that Artemis is committed. It will be a her. The first woman will step foot on the moon, and she will be an American astronaut. Do we have your commitment that we will win the race to the moon and China will not beat us?
Senator, I only see the left-hand portion of that poster.
While Jared assured senators at the hearing of this commitment multiple times, some doubted the capability of NASA to be able to afford doing both Moon and Mars with its current budget. Jared's responses implied that this could be done by driving efficiencies within the agency, alluding, for example, to NASA having 300 different social media accounts as a way of connecting to the public. But of course, one of the rumored topics of the past few weeks has been the termination of programs both in human spaceflight and also science, topics that are also wrapped up in the the geopolitical tensions with China. One example is whether SLS and Orion would be long for this world.
I don't think it's the long-term way to get to and from the moon and to Mars with great frequency, but this is the plan we have now, and we've got to get this crew around the moon and the follow-on crew to land on the moon.
These comments sort of imply that with Isaacman at the head of NASA, Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 are safe as they are, but that future missions would probably no longer follow the current plan. So that means that, at least in the near future, SLS and Orion won't get canceled, and therefore it's something that NASA would still have to pay for, while also focusing on a newly formed and hypothetical Mars program under his administration. So this brings back into the question the matter of money, something that he still didn't really specifically answer to, other than the previously suggested efficiencies. Money is probably one of the most pressing issues for Congress, since at the end of the day, they're in control of the purse, so they're the ones most interested in knowing how the programs can be funded and achieved within budget. Jared was also asked about canceling the Gateway lunar station, and this is what he had to say to that.
I think the Gateway is a component of many programs that are over budget and behind schedule, sir.
So you're describing Gateway as over budget and behind schedule. I will say there's a long history in NASA of administrations coming in and canceling programs and causing massive delays. Barack Obama did that with Constellation, and NASA struggled for years as a consequence. As administrator, are you going to cancel the Gateway program?
Senator, I have no intention as of now to say that I would cancel any program. I need to, if I'm confirmed, get in the job and understand where things are at. I want to assure you and this committee that I want to see America win and succeed and lead in space, whether that be the moon, Mars, low Earth orbit, and beyond. I do not want to see us come in second place, and I certainly don't want to see the right-hand side of that poster you put up, sir.
So for the moment, there's still no clarity on what the decision will be, and it seems to be something that we'll have to figure out after the fact, once he's actually the NASA administrator. Some of the members also alluded multiple times to the risk of retiring the ISS with no successor and losing control of low Earth orbit to China, again returning back to the geopolitical strategy. Some were also concerned about NASA potentially needing to move away from LEO completely in order to fund Mars missions. Others were also concerned that Earth science programs would be terminated in order to free up funding, as that's something that the first Trump administration already tried to do and may try again in this second one. But one major issue that kept coming up was, of course, Jared's ties to Elon Musk, the CEO of NASA contractor SpaceX. Jared has flown on 2 SpaceX Crew Dragon flights, has the Polaris program tied up with it as well, and his own company, Shift 4, also has a major deal with Starlink. So of course, the debate of whether this will be influential or not was also center stage in the hearing. It even got a little heated when Senator Ed Markey insisted on knowing whether Musk was present when President Trump communicated to Jared his intention to nominate him as NASA administrator.
During that same trip, then President-elect Trump offered you the NASA administrator job. Is that correct?
At the conclusion of the meeting, Senator, he did.
Was Elon Musk in your meeting when Trump offered you the NASA position at Mar-a-Lago?
Senator, I was interviewed by the President of the United States.
Was Elon Musk in the meeting when he offered you the job?
Senator, my meeting was with the President of the United States.
So Elon Musk was not in the meeting, is that what you're saying?
Senator, I was being interviewed and speaking with the President of the United States.
You can just say he was not in the meeting. Was he in the meeting or not in the meeting?
Senator, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can. I was being interviewed by the President of the United States.
It's not a difficult question. Was Elon Musk in the room when the President offered you the job?
Senator, my meeting was with the President of the United States.
Based on the share of votes in the Senate, Jared is expected to be confirmed and named the 15th NASA administrator. But if this hearing has shown us anything, it's that dealing with politics can be just as tough as spaceflight. And it's not going to be easy for him, a Washington outsider, to eventually have to navigate through that environment, including having to defend decisions made by the executive branch for NASA's programs, as well as the budgets proposed by the president in the coming fiscal years. And on the topic of NASA budgets, it's definitely going to generate lots to talk about once we start getting the first presidential budget proposal, which might even be in the next few weeks. So if you want to know more about NASA's budget in the past, why it was the way it was, and what Jared will have to deal with once he becomes administrator, we've got a video in the works all about it. So stay tuned for when it airs on our channel. Now what's for sure is that there's going to be lots of drama ahead. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with Astroscale, which is going to refuel a satellite for the US Space Force. Many satellites come to their end once they're out of propellant, as there's really no way to fill up in orbit. Astroscale wants to change that by offering a refueling service, and the Space Force wants to try it out, so it contracted the company's US branch to perform 2 refueling operations for one of its satellites. To top up this satellite, Astroscale is proposing APSR, a 300-kilogram spacecraft with a refillable hydrazine tank. Hydrazine is a monopropellant, so Astroscale doesn't need to worry about oxidizers for now. The refueler will be launched above geostationary orbit, from where it'll approach its target, so it can dock and refill the satellite. But that's not the end of the mission. APSR will then undock and go to an in-orbit fuel depot to get more hydrazine, so it can go on to its next client. Now this sounds like an ambitious concept, and it'll be very cool to see that mission play out. Fortunately, we won't have to wait long, as the mission is set to launch in summer of next year. It's been close to a decade since New Horizons gave humanity its first ever close-up look at the former planet Pluto, now a dwarf planet, and its moons. But New Horizons is still going strong, and it just woke up from hibernation to study the Kuiper Belt for the next 6 months. 6 years after New Horizons visited the small Kuiper Belt object Arrokoth, the furthest ever object visited by a spacecraft from Earth, astronomers and mission controllers are looking for another Kuiper Belt object for the spacecraft to fly by. They've enlisted the Subaru telescope in Hawaii to help with this search, and while New Horizons is looking for its next target from space, Subaru will make an observing run this June to aid in the effort. New Horizons is currently 60 times farther away from the Sun than Earth, or over twice as far out from the Sun as it was when it flew by Pluto in July of 2015. It's not only looking at objects in the Kuiper Belt, but also gathering data on the dust and radiation environment out there. But it won't linger for too long. New Horizons is flying away from the solar system at over 480 million kilometers, or 300 million miles per year. That is a really fast clip. Since 2019, SpaceX has been launching its Starlink satellite mega constellation to provide fast, low-latency broadband access for people worldwide, including those who don't have access to regular internet services. Amazon is about to fly its own Kuiper constellation to compete with Starlink, and China is starting to fly its own Starlink equivalent called Qianfan, which means 1,000 sails in Chinese, or G60. We've already seen a few launches for this constellation, and this week a video surfaced showing a terminal for the Qianfan service. Like Starlink and Kuiper, the Qianfan terminal is a small and portable one. It can also rotate by itself, comes with a power bank, and is reportedly priced at $170 US. For comparison, a standard Starlink kit goes for $349 US. There are currently 90 Qianfan satellites in low Earth orbit, 78 of them operational. The last Qianfan launch was a month ago, and 5 of these launches have happened since 2024. But the constellation is planned to grow massively, with up to 15,000 satellites put in orbit before the project ends. NASA's Juno mission experienced a few issues during its 71st close approach to Jupiter on April 4th. Just an hour before its closest flyby of the gas giant, Juno suddenly went into safe mode, which means it turned off all non-essential functions and powered down its science instrument. The spacecraft is designed to do this when it detects an anomaly, so it can focus all of its resources on essential tasks. During safe mode, Juno points its antenna towards Earth for communication and reboots its computer. Now this worked, but another problem occurred shortly thereafter, so Juno once again entered safe mode just 45 minutes after closest approach, and the spacecraft recovered yet again. NASA's engineers are currently analyzing the data to figure out what happened, but they suspect that it might have to do with radiation. Jupiter has the most extreme radiation environment of all the planets in the solar system. Juno is built to withstand the radiation, but it's still affected by it sometimes. It seems that the safe mode events on the latest flyby may have happened as Juno passed through radiation belts. Juno arrived in Jupiter in 2016 and has unexpectedly entered safe mode 4 times since. Each time, it did exactly what it was supposed to do and recovered successfully. On May 7th, Juno will get close to Jupiter once again, and hopefully that approach will be less eventful. In January 2024, Impulse Space announced Helios, a kick stage designed to send large payloads to high-energy orbits, effectively adding a 3rd stage to already existing launchers. This week, both the Common Dome and the Liquid Oxygen engine dome of the Helios test tank were sleeved. In this process, Impulse added what is essentially the outer shell on the vehicle to the dome. Helios is designed to carry over 13,000 kilograms of propellant, enabling it to deliver payloads that are 6.5 meters tall and 4.5 meters in diameter to nearly any location in the solar system. But of course, that depends on the rocket used for launch. The spacecraft will be powered by Deneb, a liquid methane and liquid oxygen engine created by Tom Mueller, founder of Impulse Space, who you may know as the brain behind the Merlin engine for SpaceX's Falcon vehicles. This sleeving step is a crucial part of Helios's progress, providing increased structural support as well as thermal management and vibration mitigation. The company's been posting a number of updates on social media lately. With all of this progress, Impulse Space and Helios appear well on track for their planned first launch in 2026. The Italian space logistics company D-Orbit has bought a ride into space on the Miura 5 rocket from the Spanish company PLD Space. With its Ion orbital transfer vehicle, D-Orbit launches customer rideshare payloads into precise orbits and has already flown 17 successful missions, most of which were on a Falcon 9. With Miura 5, D-Orbit gets to add a European rocket and equatorial orbits to its capabilities. PLD currently plans to launch the rocket's maiden flight in 2026 from Europe's spaceport in French Guiana. PLD announced that it's now filled more than 80% of the available slots until 2027, so if all goes well, we'll see Ion fly from Kourou within the next couple of years. We spoke to D-Orbit's VP of Business Development, Stefano Antonetti, on NSF Live this week. It was a really interesting conversation, so be sure to check it out on YouTube if you want to learn more about D-Orbit and Ion. Now on to another up-and-coming European launch company, Latitude. On April 8th, the French company successfully fired up the first flight version of the combustion chamber for its Navier engine. The 3D printed engine runs on RP-1 fuel and liquid oxygen and fired for a full 10 seconds at Latitude's Titan Research and Test Center. This week's hot fire test provided the company with valuable data that'll help to refine the engine for future, longer duration tests. These upcoming tests will include the addition of a turbopump and catalyst, bringing Latitude closer to completing its rocket engine. The goal of this effort is to build a 19-meter tall rocket called Zephyr that's supposed to be capable of delivering a payload of 200 kilograms into orbit. The rocket features 7 sea-level Navier engines in its first stage and 1 vacuum-optimized Navier engine in its second stage. The development of this engine is progressing quickly, and perhaps in the not-so-distant future, Europe may see another launcher head to space. Now let's take a look at the space traffic of the week and see what's coming up next week in spaceflight. Starting off the week, we had the launch of a Falcon 9 from Florida on April 6th at 3:07 UTC, carrying a batch of 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites into orbit. The first stage for this mission was flying for a 19th time, and it successfully landed on SpaceX's drone ship Just Read the Instructions. From the other coast, we had another Starlink launch, but this one from foggy Vandenberg. Liftoff took place on April 7th at 23:06 UTC, with a batch of 27 Starlink V2 mini satellites heading into low Earth orbit. While the fog occulted the views of the rocket while on the ground, the booster had no soot on this one because it was brand new. This was yet another freshly introduced booster for SpaceX's West Coast booster fleet. After its successful landing on SpaceX's drone ship Of Course I Still Love You, it can now continue onto its next launch. With the 2 Starlink launches this week, SpaceX has now launched a total of 8,254 Starlink satellites into orbit, of which 1,038 have re-entered and 6,496 have moved into their operational orbit. A few hours later, from Kazakhstan, we had the launch of a Soyuz crew to the International Space Station. Liftoff of the Soyuz MS-27 mission took place on April 8th at 5:47 UTC from Site 316 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. On board Soyuz MS-27 were Commander Sergei Ryzhikov and Flight Engineer Alexei Zubritsky, both Roscosmos cosmonauts, and Flight Engineer and NASA astronaut Johnny Kim. Both Zubritsky and Kim are rookies, with this being their first flight into space, while Ryzhikov is making his third flight into space on this mission. The trio docked to the ISS about 3 hours after launch, docking to the Prashal module at 8:57 UTC. Soyuz MS-27 and its crew will spend approximately 8 months on the station and are scheduled to return no earlier than December 8th. This is the first planned flight of Soyuz that's slated to spend 8 months on station, as previous missions often stay just 5 to 7 months on average. The reason for this is because Russia now wants to reduce the cadence of its flights to the station as a money-saving measure, going from 2 flights every year to now 3 flights every 2 years. With the Soyuz MS-27 crew on board the ISS, the crew of Soyuz MS-26 can now return home. Roscosmos cosmonauts Alexei Ovchinin and Ivan Wagner, as well as NASA astronaut Don Pettit, will undock from the Rosviet module on April 19th at 21:15 21:57 UTC. Their landing on the steppes of Kazakhstan should happen a few hours later on April 20th at 1:17 UTC. This week we also had the launch of a Changzheng 3B rocket from Xichang on April 10th at 16:47 UTC. The rocket was carrying the Tongxian Jisoo Xi'an 17 satellite into a geosynchronous transfer orbit. This is a classified satellite for the Chinese government, claimed to be for testing of multi-band high-speed satellite communication technologies. Going into next week, we'll have quite a few launches, including a couple of Starlink launches from the Cape and a couple of Starshield launches from Vandenberg. This past week, ULA tried to launch the first operational flight of Amazon's Project Kuiper on its Atlas V rocket, but unfortunately the weather led to a scrub on the last attempt this past Wednesday. The launch has been rescheduled for next week, so hopefully Atlas will have more luck with the weather by then. Next week, we'll also have the return of the Minotaur rocket. Yes, the Peacekeeper missile-based rocket, with the launch of the NROL-174 mission from Vandenberg. That one jumps off the pad lickety-split, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And also next week in space traffic, we'll have the next launch of New Shepard, NS-31, carrying an all-female passenger flight. NS-31 will include celebrities Gayle King and Katy Perry, and even Jeff Bezos' own fiancée, Lauren Sanchez. It's definitely going to be quite the showing of girl power. As you probably know, if you want to stay on top of all of these upcoming events, you can use NSF's Next Spaceflight app and website to stay on track. On our app, we've also recently introduced a flight simulation feature in partnership with Flight Club, so you can check out the rocket's flight path and if it might be visible from your area. The app is free to download, so give it a try and tell us how it goes. We appreciate all of the feedback. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Elysia Segal for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.